1. Intro. What if the voice in your head isn't wisdom at all, but fear? Wearing the mask of intelligence? Before we go deeper, just pause. Subscribe to Legacy of Thinkers, where ancient wisdom meets modern struggle. If you've ever felt trapped inside your own mind, this channel is probably for you. Because overthinking doesn't always mean you care more. Sometimes, it means you trust fear more than truth. 2. Common belief. Most people think overthinking is just a thinking problem. They assume the mind is producing too much. Too many thoughts, too many scenarios, too many warnings, too many imagined outcomes. So they treat it like noise. They try to shut it down, distract themselves, stay busy, scroll more, talk less, sleep it off, or just wait for it to pass. And when none of that works, they turn on themselves. They say, "Why can't I stop? Why is my brain like this? Why do I make everything harder?" But that belief misses something important. Overthinking doesn't usually begin because someone is weak or broken. In many cases, it begins as protection. The mind is trying to guard you from discomfort. It's not always deep wisdom. Often, it's deep hesitation. The mind keeps spinning because it believes one more thought might avoid pain, embarrassment, regret, uncertainty. It searches for the perfect answer because it fears the cost of an imperfect one. That's why overthinkers look calm outside, but feel exhausted inside. Their mind isn't resting. It's rehearsing, scanning, negotiating with the future, trying to control things that were never fully controllable. A conversation not yet happened. A decision without guarantees. A relationship that may not last. A risk that may fail or succeed. The common belief says, "I need fewer thoughts." But deeper down, it's more like, "I'm afraid of what happens if I stop thinking." Because when thinking stops, action begins. And action makes uncertainty real. So the issue isn't always the number of thoughts. Sometimes, it's dependence on thinking itself. Thinking starts to feel safer than living. Analyzing feels safer than deciding. Delay feels safer than movement. And that's where people get stuck for years. Not because they lack clarity, but because thinking feels like protection. It feels productive, responsible, even intelligent. But a lot of the time, it's just fear, dressed in something respectable. 3. Insight reversal. Here's a shift most people never consider. Overthinking isn't always the enemy. Sometimes, it's a signal. A pattern your mind learned. Because at some point, it worked. Slowing down, analyzing deeply, anticipating outcomes. Maybe that once helped you avoid mistakes. So the mind kept doing it. Not because it's perfect, but because it was useful before. The Stoics wouldn't rush to silence the mind. They would question it. Not every thought deserves belief, but every pattern deserves inspection. Instead of asking, "How do I stop thinking?" they'd ask, "What am I trying to control right now? And is it actually within my control?" This is where things shift. Overthinking grows when we try to manage outcomes that depend on too many variables. Other people's opinions, future events, guarantees that don't exist. The more uncertain things feel, the harder the mind tries to simulate control. It runs scenarios, replays conversations, imagines better responses, predicts consequences. It feels like preparation, but rarely brings clarity. It mostly creates tension. The Stoic view doesn't reject thinking. It refines it. It separates what belongs to you from what doesn't. Your effort, your choices, your response, those are yours. The result, the reaction, the timing, those are not fully yours. When the mind ignores that line, it starts looping. So the issue isn't thinking too much. It's thinking in the wrong direction. Trying to solve what can't be solved early. Trying to guarantee what can't be guaranteed. And in doing that, it drains energy from the present moment. The only place where change can actually happen. Once you see this, everything shifts. You don't eliminate thinking. You redirect it. From prediction to action. From imagined outcomes to present choices. From controlling everything to owning something real. 4. Root cause. If you watch the pattern closely, you'll notice overthinking isn't random. It has direction. It circles around specific things. Decisions that matter. Conversations that feel risky. Outcomes that feel uncertain. And beneath all that, there's usually one quiet driver. The need for certainty in an uncertain world. The mind starts believing, if it just thinks long enough, it will find a safe version of the future. Controlled, predictable, regret-free. So it replays the past, searching for missed signals. It simulates the future, searching for perfect timing. It builds mental checklists, trying to eliminate every mistake before anything happens. Not because it enjoys it, but because it fears being wrong. This is where it becomes exhausting. It's not just thinking. It's trying to outsmart uncertainty itself. The Stoics would say something simple, but uncomfortable. Uncertainty isn't a flaw. It is the system. Life doesn't promise clarity before action. It doesn't give guarantees before commitment. And when the mind rejects that, it works harder, thinks longer, loops endlessly. But the deeper issue isn't just uncertainty. It's your relationship with it. Some people move forward without full clarity. Others freeze. The difference isn't intelligence. It's tolerance. The ability to sit with not knowing, without trying to escape it immediately. Overthinking often begins when that tolerance is low. The mind treats uncertainty like danger, not just discomfort. So it tries to protect you by delaying action, keeping you in analysis, convincing you that one more thought will finally unlock clarity. But clarity doesn't always come before action. Many times, it's created through action. That's the root people miss. Your mind isn't broken. It's trying to remove uncertainty from a reality that was never certain. And the more it tries, the more trapped it feels. 5. Stoic framework. The Stoic response isn't to fight the mind. It's to train it to return to what's real. Stoicism begins with a simple distinction. Some things are within your control, and some things are not. Sounds obvious, but in practice, this is where suffering begins. When those two get mixed together, your effort is yours. Your judgment is yours. Your choices, your values, your response, those belong to you. But outcomes don't fully belong to you. Other people's reactions, not yours. Timing, not yours. The future, not yours in that way. Overthinking loses power when you stop asking, How do I make everything go right? And start asking, what is mine to do right now? That question pulls you back from fantasy to responsibility. It shrinks the problem from 1,000 imagined outcomes to one present action. That's why Stoicism feels practical. It doesn't ask you to feel nothing. It asks you to become precise. Instead of predicting everything, you prepare. Instead of controlling the whole path, you take the next honest step. Instead of demanding certainty, you practice steadiness. Even discomfort changes meaning. Anxiety isn't a stop sign anymore. Uncertainty isn't failure. It's just part of being human. Trying to live with courage. The goal isn't feeling perfect first. It's acting with clarity, even while discomfort exists. So when the mind spins, the Stoic pauses and sorts. What is in my control? What is not? What needs action? What needs release? That sorting creates peace. Not because life becomes easy, but because your attention stops serving the wrong thing. Over time, the mind changes. You stop hiding in thought. You start using thought as a tool. That's the difference between noise and discipline. 6. Practical shift. Understanding the pattern is one thing. Changing it takes action. Not a huge overhaul. Just small, repeatable moves that bring you back to reality. The Stoic way is practical. You don't wait to feel calm. You act and teach your mind calm. Start by shortening the gap between thought and action. When you catch yourself looping, define the next concrete step. Not the full outcome, just the next step. Send the message. Draft the outline. Make the call. If it feels vague, make it smaller until it's obvious. Clarity often follows movement, not the other way around. Next, set boundaries for thinking. Give yourself 10 minutes, maybe 15. Write the key concerns down. Separate what you can influence from what you can't. Then close the loop. When the thoughts return, don't reopen the debate. Remind yourself, this has already been considered. Now it's time to act. Another shift. Replace prediction with preparation. Instead of foreseeing everything, ask what would make you ready for most outcomes. Strengthen the basics. Your skills, your communication, your timing. You won't control everything, but you will be ready for more. And that reduces the need for endless rehearsing. Also, treat discomfort differently. Not as a stop signal, but as a cue to move. That urge to delay often feels like caution, but it can be avoidance. So ask something simpler. What's one honest action I can take now, even if it's imperfect? Then take it, not recklessly, but deliberately. And create one rule. Thinking must serve action. If it doesn't move you forward, it's probably looping. Over time, this trains your mind to value direction over perfection. You don't remove thinking, you give it purpose. And that's the shift. From waiting for certainty to building momentum. From managing outcomes to committing to the next step. From living in your head to moving in the real world. 7. Closing insight. At some point, you realize something. The mind was never meant to solve life in advance. It was meant to guide you, step by step. The problem wasn't thinking too much. It was asking thinking to remove all uncertainty first. Clarity isn't a final destination. It sharpens as you move. Each small decision, each honest step, each moment you act instead of delay. That's where confidence builds. Quietly. Not because everything is certain, but because you learn. You can handle what comes. The Stoic insight is simple, but it takes practice. You don't need a perfect plan. You just need a direction. You trust enough to take one step. And when you do, the mind begins to settle. Not because it knows everything, but because it finally has a role. So when the thoughts return, don't fight them, and don't follow them endlessly. Notice them, sort them, then come back to what is yours to do. Again and again. This is how steadiness is built. If this reflection resonated with you, consider leaving a comment and subscribe to Legacy of Thinkers. If it resonated, continue the practice tomorrow.